There it is. Okay. What's going on? Good evening. Happy Thanksgiving, my fellow Americans. That was Black Braid. I have chosen Black Braid's first album for the evening. Black Braid is a Native American black metal band from, I think, Illinois. So, for me, Thanksgiving is not either some patriotic nonsense about the altruistic intentions of the American colonies, nor do I think we just came in here and slaughtered a bunch of Indians and took the land. However, each tribe had a very different experience of the white man over a very complicated period of time where Europeans were fighting on American soil to claim the New World. This was just the decisions that were made by the, at the time, superior masters to the inhabitants of the colonies, occupying those lands, who were told a very, very different story about why they were there. And then we were told a very different story about the story that they were told. And that's why we're living a lie. And that is what compels me to do things like read Martin Heidegger to you. So, there's a link in the chat to the particular YouTube channel that I am playing the Black Braid from. It is not Black Braid's channel. I would recommend you check out their channel. Otherwise, do enjoy your Thanksgiving. It is ultimately a good tradition. Alright, so we're going to read 32 and maybe 33 if I feel like it. I wanted to start an hour ago, but I really had to do some computer maintenance before I could run my Streamlabs, and I like doing things on Streamlabs. I like doing things on open source software that is installed on my computer. StreamYard's fine and dandy. It irritates me. I don't like it. I enjoy how I have control here. Okay. 32. Understanding and interpretation. Also, I think I fixed the scrolling mechanism, so this should actually be a smooth transition from page to page. Took me 32 fucking chapters to get that straight, right? As understanding, Dasein projects its being upon possibilities. This being towards possibilities, which understands, is itself a potentiality for being. And it is so because of the way these possibilities, as disclosed, exert their counterthrust, or Rückschlag, upon Dasein. The projection of the understanding has its own possibility, that of developing itself. Sich auszubilden. This development of the understanding we call interpretation, which the word is Auslegung, and older editions used Auslegung. It looks like I don't know why it's saying that. It looks like it's the same word. Okay, I don't understand the logic there, but anyway. All right, it is understanding appropriately, it is the understanding appropriates understandingly that which is understood by it. In interpretation, understanding does not become something different. It becomes itself. Such interpretation is grounded existentially in understanding. The latter does not arise from the former, nor is interpretation the acquiring of information about what is understood. It is rather the working out of possibilities projected in understanding. In accordance with the trend of these preparatory analysis of everyday Dasein, we shall pursue the phenomenon of interpretation in understanding the world. That is, in inauthentic understanding, and indeed in the mode of its geniuses. In terms of the significance which is disclosed in understanding, the world concernful being alongside the ready to hand gives itself to understand whatever involvement that which is encountered can have. Let's see what the annotation says. Nothing I need to read. Don't have to really... The second one is useful to read, so whenever that comes up. To say that circumspection discovers means that the world, which has already been understood, comes to be interpreted. The ready to hand comes explicitly into the sight which understands, all preparing, putting to rights, repairing, improving, rounding out, are accomplished in the following way. We take part in order to that which is circumspectively ready to hand, and we concern ourselves with it in accordance with what becomes visible through this process. All right, hold on. Annotation 2 we're going to read now. Ausein andergelgt. Heidegger is contrasting the verb auslegen, literally lay out, with the cognate auseinanderlegen, lay asunder or take apart. Right? So it's kind of like making an analysis of something. Looking at the whole picture and making an analysis about your findings. Which is how we come to understanding, and thus how Dasein fills itself into the space and time that you are in. Excuse me. That which has been circumspectively taken apart with regard to its in order to, and taken apart as such, that with which that which is explicitly understood has the structure of something as something. The circumspective question as to what this particular thing that is ready to hand may be receives the circumspectively interpretive answer that is for such and such a purpose. Est is zum. If we tell what it is for, des wozu, we are not simply designating something, but that which is designated is understood as that as which we are to take the thing in question. That which is disclosed in understanding that which is understood is always accessible in such a way that its as which can be made to stand out explicitly. The as makes up the structure of the explicitness of something that is understood. Hey, what's up, Monkey King Metals? Good to see you here, man. It constitutes the interpretation. In dealing with what is environmentally ready to hand, by interpreting it circumspectively, we see it as a table, a door, a carriage, or a bridge. But what we have thus interpreted, the ausgelegt, need not necessarily be also taken apart, auseinander zu liegen, by making an assertion which definitely characterizes it. Any mere predictive seeing of the ready-to-hand is, in itself, something which already understands and interprets, but does not the abundance of such an as make up the mereness of any pure perception of something? Whenever we see with this kind of sight, we already do so understandingly and interpretively. In the mere encountering of something, it is understood in terms of totality of involvements, and such seeing hides in itself the explicitness of the assignment relations of the in order to, which belongs to that totality. Okay, I missed this second one here, or did... No, we did. Just took me a while just to read one page. It's one of those nights. That which is understood gets articulated when the entity to be understood is brought close interpretively by taking as our clue the something as something. And this articulation lies before, liegt vor, our making any thematic assertions about it. In such an assertion, the as does not turn up for the first time. It just, it just gets expressed for the first time, and this is possible only in that it lies before us as something expressible. Let's take a look down here, and holy crap, there's a whole lot to be said about this. I'm definitely going to have to blaze up for this one. Don't you start canoeing on me. Was allein so möglich ist, dass es als ausbrechbares vorliegt. Here we follow the reading of the earlier editions. The hyphen in vorliegt comes at the end of the line in the later editions, but is undoubtedly meant to suggest, like the italicization of the vor in the previous sentence, that this verb is to be interpreted with unusual literalness. This paragraph is noteworthy for an exploitation of the prefix aus, as out, which fails to show up in our translation. Literally an osage, or an assertion. That sounds very close to Assange, like Julian Assange. And didn't Julian Assange assert many a thing in his time? So, an assertion is something which is said out. An Auslegung, an interpretation, is a laying out. That which is ausdrücklich, or explicit, is something that has been expressed, has been pressed out. That which is aussprechbar, our expressible, is something that can be spoken out. Like straight up. Like Julian Assange might as well be Julian Assange. And I think that's what they were doing I think that there's a slight play on it, and I'm wondering what the N does in the wordplay in German. German and Germanic languages. The verbs ausdrücken and aussprechen are roughly synonymous, but aussprechen often has the more specific connotation of pronunciation, pronouncing oneself, speaking one's mind, finishing what one has to say. Golly gee, I don't know if I can relate to any of that. While it would be possible to resolve express for ausdrücken and translate aussprechen by some such phrase as speak out, it is more convenient to use express for both verbs, especially since aussprechen and its derivatives have occurred very seldom before the present chapter, in which ausdrücken rarely appears. On the other hand, we can easily distinguish between the more frequent ausdrücklich and the ausgesprochen by translating the latter as expressed or expressly and reserving explicit for both ausdrücklich and explicit. Yeah, go for it, man. You gotta go for, like, Old German and High German. Or get there, make sure you get that in there, because then you're gonna get a deeper etymology of the German that's being spoken in the common tongue. It's I believe, Old German is one of the languages that Heilung will sing in. All right, let me make sure that that's it. I think so. Okay. All right, that was a long one. The fact that when we look at something, the explicitness of assertion can be absent does not justify our denying that there is any articulative interpretation in such mere seeing, and hence that there is any as structure in it when we have to do with anything. The mere seeing of the things which are closest to us bears in itself the structure of interpretation, and in so primordial a manner that just to grasp something free, as it were, of the as, or the as, right? It's hard for me to, the way they throw the English word as in there, it's like, is it as, is it as, is it as, os? Or I almost want to pronounce it differently than as, just because it's hard to say. It doesn't roll off the tongue. It's one of the things I notice is that, like, just to translate it properly, the English language structure has to almost have like a German cadence to it, which makes it sound a little bit off. Excellent. Go for it. Okay. Where the heck was I? Shoot. I think it was up here. I'm just gonna... Alright. That which is understood gets articulated when the entity to be understood is brought close interpretively by taking as our clue the something as... Oh, I'm sorry, I'm all the way down here. Now I remember. So instead of reading the whole page, when we merely stare at something, our just having it before us lies before us as a failure to understand it anymore. This grasping, which is free of the as, is a privation of the kind of seeing in which one merely understands. It is not more primordial than that kind of seeing, but is derived from it. If the as is ontically unexpressed, this must not seduce us into overlooking it as a constructive or as a constitutive state for understanding existential and a priori. But if we never perceive equipment that is ready to hand without already understanding and interpreting it, and if such perception lets us circumspectively encounter something as something, does this not mean that in the first instance we have experienced something purely present at hand, and then taken it as a door, as a house? This would be a misunderstanding of the specific way in which interpretation functions as disclosure. In interpreting, we do not, so to speak, throw a signification over something, some naked thing which is present at hand. Whoops, hold on. Oh yeah, we do not stick a value on it, but when something within the world is encountered as such, the thing in question already has an involvement in which is disclosed in our understanding of the world. And this involvement is one which gets laid out by the interpretation. All right. 2 and 3 we're going to be reading. The ready to hand is always understood in terms of a totality of involvements. This totality need not be grasped explicitly by a thematic interpretation. Even if it has undergone such an interpretation, it recedes into an understanding which does not stand out from the background, and this is the very mode in which it is essential foundation for everyday circumspective interpretation. In every case, this interpretation is grounded in something we have in advance, in a forehaving. Interesting. Okay, so let's dive into this this big one here. Okay. In this paragraph, Heidegger introduces the important word Vorheb, Vorsicht, and Vorgriff. Vorheb is perhaps best translated by some expression as what we have in advance, or what we have before us. Okay? But we shall usually find it more convenient to adopt the shorter term for having, occasionally resorting in hendiades, or hendiades, as in the present sentence, and we shall handle the other terms in the same manner. Vorsicht, what we see in advance, or foresight. Okay, so Vorsicht is foresight. Very cool. Awesome to know that. Is the only one of these expressions which occurs in ordinary German usage, and often has the connotation of caution or prudence. Heidegger, however, uses it in a more general sense, somewhere more akin to the English foresight, without the connotation of a shrewd and accurate prediction. Vorgriff, what we grasp in advance or for conception, is related to the verb vorgriffen, to anticipate, as well as the noun begriff. Is interesting. I find it also interesting that they have the word griff in that word, which makes me think of grift, and it's just like there is a relationship between your wisdom and foolishness and your ability to identify a grift, and that usually starts with knowing about the existence of a grift. And then we have a 3. We'll get to that when we cross it. As the appropriation of understanding, the interpretation operates in being towards a totality of understanding. The interpretation operates in being towards a totality of involvements, which is already understood, a being which understands. So it's kind of it kind of like reminds me of like in the movies, TV shows, or whatever, you get all these characters, and there's a character introduced. Nobody knows what language he's speaking, and maybe we as an audience will get subtitles, just to see how this pans out. A lot of humor was involved in this system. And I really don't know where the heck I was going with that. It was good at the time. Anyway. Oh yeah, it was kind of related to the whole bit about, like, the grift and, the kids, everybody's trying to say, like, hey, do you understand? Like, do you understand how this concept works? So somebody, like, demonstrates an action, another one shows them an object, and another one does a couple of symbols or gestures or something, and then somehow all of that context clicks, and then the person of the foreign tongue grasps a concept of the words that we're speaking, and then there's a new level of ability to understand and to see if this person would like to be helpful. Right? This is a kind of thing that goes on. All right, let me see here. Foresight first. No, too far. When something is understood but is still veiled, it becomes unveiled by an act of appropriation, and this is always done under the guidance of a point of view, which fixes that with regard to which what is understood is to be interpreted. In every case, interpretation is grounded in something we see in advance, in a foresight. This foresight takes the first cut out of what has been taken into our force for having, and it does so with a view to a definite way in which this can be interpreted. Okay, this is making a lot of sense when you think about the layers in which your reality in front of you is unfolding, and the closeness to understanding what is unfolding right in front of you compared to your understanding of things that are still approaching from further away, in which you may be less familiar with them, right? And that's where these three categorizations come from, which is giving us a certain sense of spatial relationship. All right, so anyway, we're down at 3 now, right? Die Ausgelung grundet Jewels in einer Vorsicht, die das in Vorheb, Genomin auf ein bestimmte Auslegverket hin ansnidet. The idea seems to be that just as the person who cuts off the first slice of a loaf of bread gets the loaf started, the foresight makes a start on what we have in advance, the forehaving. Anything understood which is held in our forehaving and towards which we set our sights foresightedly becomes conceptualized through the interpretation. In such an interpretation, the way in which the entity we are interpreting is to be conceived can be drawn from the entity itself, or the interpretation can force the entity into concepts to which it is opposed in its manner of being. In either case, the interpretation is already decided for a definite way of conceiving it, either with finality or with reservation. It is grounded in something we grasp in advance, in a foreconception. One second. 191. Okay. Yeah, this is good. All right, we are going to take a break right here. Okie dokie. Let's close that one. All right. So we're going to listen to a little bit more of Black Braid's first album as our Thanksgiving episode. And we will wrap up chapter 32, hopefully maybe by around 11 o'clock. Then I will see how I feel about maybe reading chapter 33 if I want to push this towards midnight. Anywho, enjoy. Oh, there we go. All right, we are back. Let me bring that back just a pinch. Oop, perfect. All right, there we go. Susie Q, welcome in the chat. I don't expect this to be, I don't expect too many people to get in here tonight. It's, tomorrow's Thanksgiving. It's a travel night, or people got to be in bed early. Me, I'm just getting this out because I got to get it out. So we see how things go. I did the social media blast, gave people a couple hours. It's all right. All right, here we go. Whenever something is interpreted as something, the interpretation will be founded essentially upon forehaving, foresight, and foreconception. An interpretation is never a presuppositionless apprehending of something presented to us. Eins vorgegeben. Here, as in many other passages, we have translated vorgeben by various forms of the verb to present, but it would perhaps be more in line with Heidegger's discussion of the prefix vor, to write, or something for given. If, when one is engaged in a particular concrete kind of interpretation, in the sense of exact textual interpretation, one likes to appeal, beroft, to what stands there, then one finds that what stands there in the first instant is nothing other than the obvious, undiscussed assumption, Vormeinung, of the person who does the interpreting in an interpretive approach. There lies such an assumption as that which has been taken for granted, gesetzt, with the interpretation as such. That is to say, as that which has been presented in our forehaving, our foresight, and our foreconception. How are we to conceive the character of this fore? Have we done so if we say formally that this is something a priori? Why does understanding, which we have designated as a fundamental existential of Dasein, understanding as a fundamental, right, have this structure as its own? Anything interpreted as something interpreted has the as structure as its own. And how is this related to the for structure? The phenomenon of the as structure is manifestly not to be dissolved or broken up into pieces, but is a primordial analytic for it thus ruled out. Are we to concede that such phenomena are ultimates? Then there would still remain the question why. Or do the four structures of understanding and the as structure of interpretation show an existential ontological connection with the phenomenon of projection? And does this phenomenon point back to a primordial state of Dasein's being? Before we answer these questions, for which the preparation up till now has been far from sufficient, we must investigate whether what has become visible as the forestructure of understanding and the as structure of interpretation does not itself already present us with a unitary phenomenon, one of which copious use is made in philosophical problematics, though what is used so universally falls short of the primordiality of ontological explication. In the projecting of the understanding, entities are disclosed in their possibility. The character of the possibility corresponds on each occasion with the kind of being of the entity which is understood. Entities within the world generally are projected upon the world, that is, upon a whole of significance to whose reference relations concern as being in the world has been tied up in advance. When entities within the world are discovered along with the being of Dasein, that is, when they have come to be understood, we say that they have meaning, or sin with two N's. But that which is understood, taken strictly, is not the meaning, but the entity, or alternatively, being. Meaning is that wherein the intelligibility, the Verstandlichkeit of something maintains itself. That which can be articulated in a disclosure by which we understand, we call meaning. The concept of meaning embraces the formal existential framework of what necessarily belongs to that which an understanding interpretation articulates. Meaning is the upon which of a projection in terms of which something becomes intelligible as something. It gets its structure from a forehaving, a foresight, and a foreconception. Sin is das durch Vorsicht and Vorgif strukturiert worauf hin des Antworts aus dem her etwas als etwas verstandlicht wird. Notice that our usual translation of verstandlicht and verstandlichkeit as intelligible and intelligibility fails to show connection of the words with verstandnis, etc. This connection could have been brought out effectively by writing understandable, understandability, etc., but only at the cost of awkwardness. Insofar as understanding and interpretation make up existential states of being of the there, meaning must be conceived as the formal existential framework of the disclosedness which belongs to understanding. Meaning is an existential of Dasein, not a property attaching to entities, lying behind them, or floating somewhere as an intermediate domain. Dasein only has meaning so far as the disclosedness of being in the world can be filled in by the entities discoverable in that disclosedness. Sin hat nur das Dasein, insofern dein Erschlossenheit des in der Weltsein durch das in entdeckbar sein erfüllbar ist. The point of this puzzle, of this puzzling and ambiguous sentence, may become somewhat clearer if the reader recalls that here, as elsewhere, the verb erschließen, or disclose, is used in the sense of opening something up so that its contents can be discovered. What thus gets opened up will then be filled in as more and more of its contents get discovered. So discovery fills the world, right? Discovery fills the world, and it's fueled by all of these fours that are out there, these FOREs, these foreshadowings, these foreconceptions, these forinceptions, for invocations, for this, for that, right? It's about the spark of the idea in the mind. Should have written Ansuj on my head somewhere. Today I've got Thurs up there, Nalthes, and Fehu. Hold on a second. Why did I lose my spot? I shouldn't have. Yeah, I read that for. Insofar as understanding and interpretation make up the existential state of being in the there, meaning must be conceived as the formal existential framework of the disclosedness which belongs to understanding. Meanwhile, in an existential Dasein, not a property attaching to entities lying behind them or floating somewhere as an intermediate domain. Dasein only has meaning so far as the disclosedness of being in the world can be filled in by the entities discoverable in that disclosedness. Opened up. Wait, didn't I read this one already? I did, didn't I? Biggest sentence, baby. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I just reread all of that on you. I was that guy. I did it. I can't take it back, and I won't take it back. Insofar as understanding and interpretation make up the existential state of being of the there, meaning must be conceived as the formal existential framework of the disclosedness which belongs to understanding. Meaning is an existential of Dasein, not a property attaching to entities lying behind them or floating somewhere as an intermediate domain. Dasein only has meaning so far as the disclosedness of being in the world can be filled in by the entities discoverable in that disclosedness. Hence, only Dasein can be meaningful sinlos, or meaningless, sinol, something. It's cut off. It's cut off in the transfer. But anyway, that is to say, it's only being and the entities disclosed with its being can be appropriated in understanding or can remain relegated to non-understanding, right? Yeah, appropriated, right? Like, if you get somebody to speak your language, you're kind of appropriating them, right? In a certain sense, right? I mean, not really. Because that's a little bit different. And there's nothing wrong with communicating with each other. But when the appropriation doesn't benefit the one who has to give something, the one who is making the gesture to mirror you, there's going to be a certain resentment that builds up there. So anyway, that is to say that its own being and entities disclosed with its being can be appropriated in understanding or can remain relegated to non-understanding. The interpretation of the concept of meaning is one which is ontologico-extensial in principle. If we adhere to it, then all entities whose kind of being is of a character other than Dasein must be conceived as unmeaning or unsinnigis, well, one of those two, essentially devoid of any meaning at all. Here, unmeaning does not signify that we are saying anything about the value of such entities, but it gives expression to an ontological characteristic, and only that which is unmeaning can be absurd or weidensinnig. The present at hand, as Dasein encounters it, can be, as it were, assault. Dasein's being, natural events, for instance, can break in upon us and destroy us. If we are inquiring about the meaning of being, our investigation does not then become a deep one, a tiefsinnig, nor does it puzzle out what stands behind being. It asks about being itself insofar as being enters into the intelligibility of Dasein. The meaning of being can never be contrasted with entities, or with being as the ground which gives entities support, for a ground becomes accessible only as a meaning, even if it is itself the abyss of meaninglessness. Interesting. This is not it yet? I thought it ended on 94. Okay, it ends on 95. Okay. Der Sinn von sein keinai Gigansatz Webracht werden zum seinenden Order zum Okay, oh, there is something at the end there to be read. Okay. Worden zum seienden Order zum sein als trägenden Grund des seienden, weil Grund nur als Sinn zugänglich wird und sie selbst der Abgrund der Sinnlosigkeit. Notice the etymology kinship between Grund or ground and Abgrund, the abyss. That was one, right? Yeah, that's the only one in here. Okay. As the disclosedness of the there, understanding always pertains to the whole of being in the world. In every understanding of the world, existence is understood with it, and vice versa. All interpretations, moreover, operate in the force structure, which we have already characterized, and any interpretation which is to contribute understanding must always have understood what is to be interpreted. This is a fact that has always been remarked, even if only in the area of depravative ways of understanding and interpretation, and as philological interpretation. The latter belongs within the range of scientific knowledge. Such knowledge demands the rigor of a demonstration to provide grounds for it. In a scientific proof, we may not presuppose what it is our task to provide grounds for. But if interpretation must in any case already operate in that which is understood, and if it must draw its nature from this, how is it to bring any scientific results to maturity without moving in a circle, especially if, moreover, the understanding which is presupposed still operates within our common information about man and the world? Yet, according to the most elementary rules of logic, this circle is a circulus virtuosus. If that be so, however, the business of historiological interpretation is included a priori from the domain of rigorous knowledge, insofar as the fact that this circle in understanding is not eliminated histologically must then be resigned to less rigorous possibilities of knowing. Historiology is permitted to compensate for this defect to some extent through the spiritual signification of its objects. But even in the opinion of the historian himself, it would admittedly be more ideal if the circle could be avoided. And if there remains the hope of creating some time a historiology which would be as independent of the standpoint to the observer as the knowledge of the nature is supposed to be. This seems like it's Heidegger working on some of those digs on the scientific establishment that effectively being in time is a challenge to, for the sake of having a breakthrough in goods and services and the technology that delivers them. As well as the pleasing aesthetic to go along with it. So anyway. Excuse me. But if we see this circle as a vicious one and look out for ways of avoiding it, even if we just sense it as an inevitable imperfection, then the act of understanding has been misunderstood from the ground up. The assimilation of understanding and interpretation to a definite ideal of knowledge is not the issue here. Such an ideal is itself only a subspecies of understanding, a subspecies which has strayed into legitimate task of grasping the present at hand in its essential unintelligibility or unverstandlichkeit. If the basic conditions which make interpretation possible are to be fulfilled, this must rather be done by not failing to recognize beforehand the essential conditions under which it can be performed. Let's see, how far down are we? 2 passages, okay. Or I'm going to call it a night after this passage, okay? Just because I got to get some sleep. I had a pretty full day today, did a workout after work, and yeah, I'm just struggling to keep my eyes open a little bit here. So, what is decisive is not to get out of the circle, but to come into it in the right way. The circle of understanding is not an orbit in which any random kind of knowledge may move. It is an expression of the existential force structure of Dasein itself. Right, because it's talking about the juxtaposition of you wanting to go from the existence you're having now and then through introducing and replacing certain elements and changing the particulars of Dasein around you, create a new Dasein. Hang on a second here. I haven't checked the chat room in a hot minute. All right. It is not to be reduced to the level of a vicious cycle or even of a circle which is merely tolerated. In the circle is hidden a positive possibility of the most primordial kind of knowing. To be sure, we genuinely take hold of this possibility only when, in our interpretation, we have understood that our first, last, and constant task is never to allow our having foresight and foreconception to be presented to us by fancies and popular conceptions, but rather to make the scientific themes secure by work out these force structures in terms of the things themselves. Because understanding, in accordance with its existential meaning, its Dasein's own potentiality for being, the ontological presuppositions of the historiological knowledge, transcend in principle the idea of rigor held in the most exact sciences. Mathematics is not more rigorous than historiology, but only narrower because the existential foundation relevant for it lies within a narrow range. The circle in understanding belongs to the structure of meaning, and the latter phenomenon is rooted in the existential constitution of Dasein, that is, in the understanding which interprets an entity for which and that's a sentence break. Understanding which interprets an entity for which, as being in the world, its being is itself an issue, has ontologically a circular structure. If, however, we note that circularity belongs ontologically to a kind of being which is present at hand, namely to subsistence, Bestand, we must altogether avoid using this phenomenon to characterize anything like Dasein ontologically. All right, that was an incredible amount for me to absorb right now, being as tired as I am, but feeling the need that I got to press on and make something. If I was a little less tired, I would have felt better if I could have gotten 2 chapters in, because there's a lot of chapters, and who knows, by the time I'm done with this, part 2 will finally be translated into English. All right, my friends, you guys have a good night. I'm going to go pass out.